There are people in this world who find God not through prayer, not through a church, not through a spiritual experience, but through pure intellectual struggle. People who argue with God, challenge God, and demand answers. And sometimes, in the middle of that argument, something unexpected happens. Dr. Jeffrey Lang was one of those people. He was a mathematics professor, a man of logic, a man who believed that if something could not be proven, it was not worth believing. And he found Islam not by surrendering his mind, but by using it. Jeffrey Lang was born in 1954 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He grew up in a Catholic household, attended Catholic schools, and was raised with a strong religious foundation. But somewhere along the way, the question started. Why does God allow suffering? If God is merciful, why is the world so full of pain? Why would a loving God send people to hell? These were not rebellious questions. These were honest questions from a young mind that needed real answers. And the answers he received were never satisfying enough. By the time Lang reached his teenage years, he had walked away from religion entirely. He became an atheist. Not an angry atheist, not a bitter atheist, but a man who simply concluded that the concept of God did not hold up under intellectual scrutiny. He pursued mathematics because mathematics made sense to him. In mathematics, everything had a proof. Everything had a reason. Everything followed from logical principles. Religion, in his view, had none of that. He went on to study mathematics at the University of Connecticut and eventually became a professor of mathematics at the University of Kansas. His life was built on logic, structure, and proof. He was respected in his field. He was comfortable in his atheism. He had no reason to change. Then, in 1982, something happened that he never expected. A group of Muslim students at his university gave him a copy of the Quran, not to convert him, not to pressure him, simply because they thought he should read it. Lang accepted the copy with polite indifference and put it on his shelf. For weeks it sat there untouched. One night, out of nothing more than curiosity, he picked it up and started reading. And from the very first pages, something struck him that he had never experienced with any other religious text. The Quran was not asking him to simply believe. It was challenging him to think. It was asking questions back at him. It was addressing his doubts directly. It was speaking to his intellect in a way that felt completely different from anything he had encountered before. In chapter Al-Baqarah, the Quran says, "This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of God, who believe in the unseen, establish prayer, and spend out of what we have provided for them." Lang noticed something immediately. The Quran was not saying believe without question. It was saying this is guidance for those who are conscious, for those who think, for those who reflect. The entire opening of the Quran was an invitation to the intellect, not a demand for blind submission. As a mathematician, Lang began reading the Quran the way he would approach a complex problem. He looked for internal consistency. He looked for logical structure. He looked for contradictions. He expected to find errors. He expected to find the kind of human inconsistencies that appear in every text written by a fallible mind. But the more he read, the more he found something else entirely. The Quran kept returning to one central argument. It kept asking human beings to observe, to reflect, to reason, to look at the world around them and think carefully about what they see. In chapter Al-Imran, verse 190, it says, "Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and the day, are signs for those of understanding." The word used for understanding in Arabic is al-albab, which refers to the deepest core of the intellect. The Quran was not appealing to emotion, it was appealing to the deepest capacity for rational thought. This was deeply unusual to Lang. Every other religious text he had encountered asked for faith first. The Quran was asking for thought first. It was presenting the universe itself as evidence. It was saying, look at the world, use your mind, and then see where that honest thinking leads you. Lang began examining the Quranic argument about human purpose. One of the core questions that had driven him to atheism was the question of suffering. If God exists and God is good, why is there so much pain in the world? This question had no satisfying answer in the religious tradition he had grown up with. But the Quran addressed this question in a way that was philosophically sophisticated, in a way he had not anticipated. In chapter Al-Baqarah, verse 105 through 157, the Quran says, "And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient, who, when disaster strikes them, say, "Indeed we belong to God, and indeed to him we will return." Those are the ones upon whom are blessings from their Lord and mercy, and it is those who are rightly guided. Lang sat with this for a long time. The Quran was not pretending that suffering does not exist. It was not offering a shallow comfort. It was acknowledging suffering directly and framing it as part of a designed experience. Human beings are being tested. The suffering is not meaningless, it is purposeful. It is part of a process of growth, development, and ultimately return to the Creator. As a mathematician, Lang recognized this as a coherent framework. It was internally consistent. It addressed the problem without dismissing it. Then Lang encountered the Quranic concept of the human being. And this is where his mathematical mind found something truly remarkable. The Quran describes the human being as a being that was created with the capacity to carry a trust that the heavens and the earth refused to carry. In chapter Al-Ahzab, verse 72, it says, "Indeed, we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, and they declined to bear it and feared it. But man undertook to bear it. Indeed, he was unjust and ignorant." Lang was struck by this description. The Quran was describing human beings not as helpless creatures waiting for divine instruction, but as beings who accepted a profound responsibility, a moral responsibility, a trust. The word in Arabic is amana, which means a sacred responsibility that one accepts knowingly. And then the Quran says man was unjust and ignorant in taking it on. This is not a condemnation. This is a description of the human condition. We accepted a responsibility we were not fully equipped to handle. And the entire Quran is essentially a guide to help us fulfill that responsibility. For Lang, this was a philosophically powerful concept. It meant that human freedom was real. Human choices were real. The suffering in the world was not evidence against a good God. It was the consequence of a species that accepted the trust of free will and moral responsibility. The pain of the world was not random. It was the result of choices made by beings who had accepted the weight of freedom. Lang continued reading and found that the Quran repeatedly challenged him personally. One of the most distinctive features of the Quran, which Lang discussed extensively in his later writings, is that it speaks directly to the reader. It does not narrate from a distance. It addresses you. It says, "O mankind, and O you who believe, and do you not see?" It creates an immediate personal relationship between the text and the reader that Lang had never experienced in any other book. He wrote later that reading the Quran felt like being seen, like something was looking directly at him and addressing his specific doubts, his specific struggles, his specific questions. As a mathematician who had spent years feeling that the universe was indifferent, this was a profoundly disorienting experience. The Quran also deeply impressed Lang with its treatment of reason and knowledge. In chapter Az-Zumar, verse 9, it says, "Are those who know equal to those who do not know?" The Quran consistently elevated knowledge, reflection, and understanding. It condemned blind following. It repeatedly told believers not to simply follow what their ancestors did if it was not based on reason and truth. In chapter Al-Baqarah, verse 170, it says, "And when it is said to them, 'Follow what God has revealed,' they say, 'Rather we will follow that which we found our fathers doing,' even though their fathers understood nothing and were not guided." The Quran was more critical of blind religious following than Lang himself had been. This was unexpected. This was not the religious text he had imagined. Lang also studied the Quranic description of the creation of the human being in light of modern science. The Quran describes the human being as being created from a nutfa amshaj, which means a mixed fluid. Modern biology confirms that a human being begins as the combination of genetic material from two sources, a sperm and an egg, each carrying half the genetic code. The Quran also describes the stages of embryonic development in terms that align with what modern embryology has confirmed, language that was completely unavailable to any human being in the 7th century. In chapter Al-Mu'minun, verses 12 through 14, the Quran says, "And certainly did we create man from an extract of clay, then we placed him as a sperm drop in a firm lodging. Then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we made the clot into a lump of flesh, and we made the lump into bones, and we clothed the bones with flesh. Then we developed him into another creation. So blessed is God, the best of creators." Lang, approaching this as a scientist and mathematician, recognized that this sequence was not random. It was describing a developmental process, a staged process, a process that follows a specific order. And modern embryology has confirmed that this is exactly how human development proceeds. From the initial combination of genetic material, to implantation, to the clinging stage, to the formation of the embryonic disc, to the development of the skeletal structure, to the covering of that structure with muscle and tissue. The Quran described this sequence 1400 years before anyone had the tools to observe it. After months of reading, studying, and honest intellectual engagement, Jeffrey Lang made a decision that surprised even himself. He accepted Islam. In 1982, he said the Shahada. He became a Muslim. Not because someone pressured him, not because he was emotionally overwhelmed, but because he followed the logical evidence to its conclusion. As a mathematician, he had spent his career proving things, and the Quran, under his rigorous intellectual examination, had proven itself to him. He later wrote 3 books about his journey. The most famous is titled Struggling to Surrender. In that book he wrote, "The Quran was different from all the books I had ever read. It did not ask me to check my mind at the door. It invited my mind in, it argued with me, it challenged me, and slowly, reluctantly, it convinced me." He also wrote, "I came to the Quran as an atheist looking for errors. I left it as a Muslim who had found truth. Not because I stopped asking questions, but because the Quran gave me a framework in which the questions themselves made sense." Lang continued his academic career as a mathematics professor after becoming Muslim. He did not abandon his intellectual life. He deepened it. He began studying Arabic to read the Quran in its original language. He began writing and speaking about the relationship between rational thought and Islamic faith. He became one of the most articulate voices for an intellectually grounded understanding of Islam in the Western world. His message was simple and consistent. Islam does not ask you to abandon your mind. Islam invites your mind. The Quran is not afraid of questions. It is built on questions. It asks you to look at the universe and think. It asks you to look at yourself and reflect. It asks you to use your deepest intellectual capacity and then honestly confront what you find. The story of Jeffrey Lang's not the story of a weak man finding comfort in religion. It is the story of a rigorous, skeptical, mathematically trained mind that followed the evidence honestly and ended up somewhere it never expected to be. It is the story of a man who argued with God for years and eventually found that God had been answering him all along through a book that had been waiting on his shelf. The Quran says in chapter Fusilat, verse 53, "We will show them our signs in the universe and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth." Jeffrey Lang looked at the signs. He used his mathematics professor's mind to examine them carefully, and they became clear to him. May we all have the honesty to look just as carefully, and may the truth become just as clear to us. If this story moved you and made you think, please subscribe to this channel right now and press the bell icon. Every single subscription helps this message reach one more person who might be searching for exactly these answers. Thank you for being here.